What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and welcome back to the Rumor Roundup, our weekly series where we cover all the news and rumors that you may have missed over the course of the week. And let's get right into it because you guys don't feel like waiting on all this stuff. So, according to Hollywood insider KC Walsh, Marvel Studios is looking at bringing back a villain that's going to be changed a little bit to serve as a mentor for a young superhero. Now, as you guys can imagine from this bit of news, speculation and rumors abound, right? Everybody's just throwing out all these ideas. Now, one of the first things that people kind of look at here is they don't really believe this is Kingpin. One, because Kingpin is seemingly already coming back in Hawkeye. It seems to be another one of those things where it's just the worst kept secret in Hollywood. So it wouldn't really make any sense that there's an inside rumor that like Marvel Studios is gonna bring back a villain to mentor a young hero, when one, we already know that villain is coming back, and two, who would Kingpin mentor? Like, Prince Pin? I don't know. It's a terrible joke. The important thing here is that the most popular theory going on right now is that Marvel Studios is gonna bring back Eric Killmonger to mentor Shuri. Now, I don't know if that's true, but to be honest with you guys, I think that would actually be a great concept. And on the surface, we could look at the events of Black Panther 1 and say, not a chance. Literally, Eric Killmonger was a guy who basically almost killed T'Challa, left him for dead, and then took over Wakanda and ruled it with an iron fist. But here's the thing about Eric Killmonger, and it's one of the things that I love the most. He's not a straight villain, right? He's not a straight guy where he's like, okay, now that I've taken over Wakanda, we're gonna blow up the world because that's what villains do. Everyone's gonna die but us. No, the motivations of Eric Killmonger were actually quite selfless if you look at his motivations in the film, that Wakanda basically had the ability to offer assistance to the Black community across the world, but simply remained hands off, and that his goal was to actually fix that problem. A lot of that seemed to be rooted in the motivations that his father had when he basically defected, not really defected, but when he kind of betrayed Wakanda by selling weapons off to different people. And so Eric Killmonger isn't really doing it, or at least he wasn't really doing it for the purpose of just acquiring his own individual wealth. I mean, there were some like narcissistic aspirations that he had going on there. That can't really be denied. But despite all of that, Eric Killmonger was capable as hell. And he's one of those characters that I still say to this day, Marvel made a massive mistake killing him off. They never should have killed off Eric Killmonger in Black Panther 1. Never, ever, 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 ever. If they were gonna kill off villains, that's fine. Eric Killmonger should have stayed alive because his character was so phenomenal and there was so much they could have done with him that it was a waste. But one of the big theories that's been going around for a number of years since Black Panther came out is that one, we didn't actually see Eric Killmonger die. We just saw him collapse, and contextually, we assumed that he was dead. Two, from what we saw with Everett K. Ross, Wakanda seems to have the ability to bring people back from the dead, basically, or at least back from the brink of death. And so it's not outside the realm of possibility that Eric Killmonger could be restored by Wakanda. Now, the biggest issue you run into here is there trust enough in Wakanda to bring Eric Killmonger back? The idea, though, is that seemingly at the end of his life, when he was basically there with T'Challa, there was some remorse there, right? In the sense that I don't know he fully repented or fully felt bad about all the things he'd done, but he believed in Wakanda, right? He loved Wakanda. He was not that dissimilar from T'Challa in terms of his perspective of Wakanda itself. He simply wanted to see them go one step further, and what differed him from T'Challa is that Eric Killmonger had the philosophy by any means necessary. And so because of that, it was not that far of a stretch to believe that Shuri and them could bring Killmonger back, and if his character arc kind of reaches this conclusion, which is, okay, look, I kind of did some pretty crappy stuff, but at the end of the day, I'm sure I could be a good guy now. He'd be a great mentor to Shuri. He'd be a great way to teach Shuri what she needs to know to become an effective combatant and to become an effective leader. Now, a lot of that would be a role that would be assigned to T'Challa, but as we know, with the unfortunate passing of Chadwick Boseman, that's not really a possibility. So in my mind, Eric Killmonger is the next best choice. Having said that, let me know what villain you would want to see come back in the MCU to mentor a younger hero. But moving on, we got our first sneak peek at SpiderVerse 2. And when I say sneak peek, what I basically mean is it looks like Miles Morales is fighting Miguel O'Hara for a little bit and they're tumbling through the multiverse. But it looks pretty wonky, right? Like the animation and everything looks pretty wild. To be honest with you guys, I think that what Sony's doing here is kind of a slingshot effect, right? And I've said this for a while, that what they're doing is they gave us SpiderVerse, which was like a full-on animated film, and it was phenomenal, right? We got like Spider-Ham and all that kind of stuff, so it's like, hey, there's some zany Spider-Man out there. I think what this movie's doing is kind of going in the extreme, right? Giving us this kind of crazy, wild, just out there animation, and then slingshotting back to something a little more tangible, which is a crossover between animated Miles Morales and Tom Holland's Spider-Man. We already know that Sony and Marvel Studios are working on a new trilogy of movies for Tom Holland's Spider-Man. So it would make perfect sense to me that if they're really going to bring this trilogy closer in line with the SpiderVerse that exists out there, meaning Tom Holland's not going to be just some Spider-Man out there just kind of doing his own thing, never crossing over with anybody else, that we would see an eventual crossover event. And to keep things from just being a little too extreme too fast, they're sort of easing us into it. Regardless of whether they're doing that or not though, I'm hyped about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. That movie was phenomenal. I loved it. It was one of the best Spider-Man movies that I think I'd ever seen in quite some time. And it left me with this desire to see more Spider-Man, right? Like, we know Miguel O'Hara was like the post-credits kind of ending teaser, so we're like, okay, we're getting Miguel O'Hara at a future point in time. But I want to see more besides him. I want to see different versions of Spider-Man. Now, if you guys want to know more about the Spider-Verse, we're actually covering that over at Comics Explained. Shameless self-promotion, but we're covering it over there, which will basically give us the whole Spider-Verse event once we're done. And then we're going to combine all of that into Dan Slott's entire Spider-Man run, which is everything from like big times to basically the starting off point for Peter Parker under Dan Slott, running all the way up to like Spider Island when everybody basically ends up being turned into a spider in New York, into Superior Spider-Man when Dr. Octopus takes over the body of Peter Parker, and then going into Spider-Verse, and then going into all new, all different Marvel and all that stuff, right? We're covering a ton of stuff, but it's gonna be a massive thing. If I'm being honest with you guys, I imagine that video might be close to 24 hours. It's gonna be insane how long that video is. Moving on though, for all you guys who are fans like me of Batman, the animated series, I think you will be happy to know that at LA Comic-Con, Kevin Conroy, the voice of Bruce Wayne / Batman himself in Batman the Animated Series, actually came out and said the entire cast is reuniting for an audio drama, and I am excited about that. I don't really know what form this is going to take, and in fact, I think it was just kind of teased that it's like a thing they're gonna be doing. If anything, I believe this is kind of a test bed, right? Like, we know that Warner Brothers is bringing back Batman the Animated Series, but honestly, as popular as that show was, and as popular as it will be now that it's coming back, I could see them wanting to expand out a little bit and saying, look, let's do a little bit more than just Batman the Animated Series. Let's take it back to the day, the retro stuff, right? Like the Batman radio shows and things like that. You know, podcasts are becoming ever popular, so it makes sense that they would take that concept, apply it to a podcast form, and kind of go forward from there. We just have to hope we don't get like a War of the Worlds kind of situation. Do you guys know about that? When they originally did War of the Worlds, there were people who were tuning in, they thought it was an actual alien invasion. They were like calling the cops and stuff, they were panicking. If you don't believe me, look it up. It's crazy, right? Like, people were idiots back then, but it was nuts. Regardless, let's continue on. Spider-Man No Way Home is apparently projected to make $200 million on opening weekend. If I'm being honest with you guys, I think that's a conservative estimation. I mean, I don't think the movie's gonna make like $1 billion opening weekend. I think it's gonna get closer to maybe like maybe 350. And here's the reason why I say this is because I will still say to this day, even with Avengers Endgame and like Infinity War, I have never seen so much hype surrounding a comic book movie before. Even when you looked at the events that went on with like Avengers Endgame and the lead up to it, I mean, sure, there were like rumors and there were plot leaks and things like that, but nothing on the order of this, right? This is, I mean, it's taken on a whole life of its own, right? Like all this insanity and all this madness with like all this stuff going on involving like Spider-Man No Way Home, it's almost like its own character, right? Like it could be a villain in the movie, right? Like you get like all these villains like Dr. Octopus and those guys we've seen in the trailer, plus like the leaks and rumors, right? Like leaks and rumors, man. I don't know. But regardless, man, I mean, it's not the biggest piece of news ever. It's not really a rumor or anything like that. But honestly, I think that's a conservative estimate. So that's my question for you guys. Do you guys think that this movie will actually break the $200 million mark that is being projected and get closer to like 300 or 400? How much money do you think this movie is going to bring in worldwide in its opening weekend? I'm curious. But moving over here to video games for a second, honestly, I didn't really see a whole lot of news and rumors surrounding video games that I was too keen on reporting here, but apparently Vince Zampella is being brought on to lead the Battlefield team to both fix a lot of the bugs and stuff like that they have, but also expand the Battlefield universe, and that does not surprise me in the slightest. So here's a quick little bit of history for those of you guys who don't know who Vince Zampella is. So you guys have all heard of the Call of Duty franchise, right? Well, Zampella was one half of the creative team that brought the entirety of Call of Duty to fruition, from the first game running all the way up to Modern Warfare 2. And the reason why I say Modern Warfare 2 is because there was a lot of controversy and a lot of really just chaos going on the back end with Modern Warfare 2 that led to like lawsuits and claims of like contracts being breached and things like that. But ultimately, Zampella and really West, they both left Infinity Ward and then went on to launch Respawn Entertainment. Now, for a lot of people who were just diehard fans of Zampella and West, they believed in them no matter what. And the first real game they released at that point in time was Titanfall, which you guys have heard recently has actually been removed from stores, although it is still playable, though for how long, I'm not really sure. But Titanfall was their first real release. And for the game that it was okay, but it left a lot of people just kind of disappointed because what they were expecting was a kind of remake, restructured version of Call of Duty, because that's the franchise that West and Zampella had really made their bones off of. Now, eventually they rallied and they came back with Titanfall 2, which was phenomenal, but these guys have been around the block for quite some time. And so because of that, it makes perfect sense if somebody like Zampella would be brought in to both fix all the bugs that are going on in Battlefield, because the newest iteration was just bad with all the bugs and everything. The whole campaign and everything was cool, but the playability was a bit of a struggle, which again, that's part and parcel to gaming development these days, right? They usually release incomplete games and then charge you for the patches to fix the game. So sure, you're paying $60, but when it's all said and done, you're basically paying $120 for a completed video game, plus whatever DLCs they offer along the way. And then in turn, he's also going to expand the Battlefield universe. But I'm curious to see what this is going to look like, because I have to believe there's gotta be some beef going on behind the scenes, right? Like literally Battlefield was in a lot of ways the big competitor to Call of Duty. You guys remember those days back in the day? Battlefield 3 versus Modern Warfare 2? A lot of people were kind of going back and forth. Really it was Battlefield 3 versus Modern Warfare 2 / Black Ops, if you want to go that way. But like the fan base was split. Like either you were a Battlefield fan or you were a Call of Duty fan. You were never really both. It was only ever one or the other. I mean, I always felt that was kind of silly, and I always thought Battlefield 3 was fun. Yeah, I always had a great time playing that game. But the important thing here is that there's probably a little bit of beef there, right? Like Battlefield is bringing on a former Call of Duty developer to fix its game and expand its universe. So I'm curious to see how the community's taking this. But moving back into the swing of things with like movies and shows and different things like that, apparently Cobie Smulders is coming back for Secret Invasion. And while that's not the most important thing ever, honestly, I'd be surprised if you guys cared. What this does really do is ask the question, what's Secret Invasion gonna look like? I'm not entirely sure what this is going to look like, right? Because in the comics, in Fantastic Four number 257, Galactus destroyed, what was it, Tanrax 4, the homeworld of the Skrulls. So like he basically devoured their homeworld. And then you go into the events of Annihilation, where what was left of the Skrull homeworld had basically spread across the rest of the Empire, so they didn't really have like a true home per se. They were really more like nomads, right? Just refugees. And then when like the Annihilation event happened, so like Annihilation basically invading the main Marvel universe from the Negative Zone and just led a rampage across the universe itself and almost destroyed it, that like the Skrulls didn't really have a place to go. And so when you went into like Brian Michael Bendis's New Avengers and then the Illuminati and all that kind of stuff, you ended up finding out those guys confronted the Skrulls because of the Kree-Skrull War and said, don't bring your conflict to Earth. But because Earth had such a tactical advantage, that the Skrulls basically did it anyway by initiating the Secret Invasion event. That in effect, Skrulls were secretly replacing superheroes and just high-ranking individuals on Earth in order to basically subjugate and control the Earth. But Galactus doesn't exist. Maybe it's because of the fact that the Skrull homeworld was destroyed by the Kree, but what we've seen from the Skrulls is they largely seem to be benign in the sense that like they're helping humanity and like humanity's helping them. So it seems to be very much like a symbiotic relationship as opposed to a parasitic one. Now we have heard little bits over the course of like their appearances, so like Captain Marvel, things like that, where basically we've been told the Skrulls are a lot more deceptive and duplicitous than they initially appear to be, that they're coming off as allies when they're actually the bad guys. And that would be a pretty interesting turn of events, right? Where basically Captain Captain Marvel was fighting on the wrong side the whole time, where like the Kree are the actual good guys in all of this, and the Skrulls legitimately are the bad guys, I think that'd be an interesting twist. I don't know if that's really gonna be the case, but the normal motivation you would expect to see from the Skrulls doesn't really seem to exist here in the MCU unless their world was destroyed by Galactus, and we just don't know it yet. I mean, I guess it'd be an interesting way to introduce this character, but the Skrulls have historically been a pretty war-bound race. I mean, they weren't initially in the comics, they were actually a peaceful race in the comics, and it wasn't until the Kree started a war with the Skrulls that they basically reverted into their more like barbarian state. So it's a little interesting. I mean, there is a lot more to the Skrulls than that. This is not Comics Explained, so we don't need to do like a whole history of the Skrulls, but nonetheless, I am curious to see how this event's gonna unfold. Like, what's the motivation of the Skrulls secretly replacing humanity? Because if anything, it kind of seems like a dick move for people who are helping you, right? I mean, I don't really know. I'm kind of curious to see what it looks like. But regardless, going into our final piece of news here, and this is one of the more interesting things, according to a Reddit post from an insider, Loki 2 is going to start filming in the summer of next year and is apparently expected to finish by the time Ant-Man 3 comes out. And I don't think that's a coincidence, because as you guys know, Kang the Conqueror is the main villain for Ant-Man 3, and Kang the Conqueror is basically the guy who replaced or took over the TVA following the death of Immortus in the Loki TV show. So it makes perfect sense to me, and I think this is really, really cool. I think Loki will be the first show to really actually cross over with a movie. Not in the sense that like you bounce literally from like Ant-Man to Loki to Ant-Man to Loki or anything like that, but like Ant-Man gives you a set of events and then Loki gives you the other half of those sets of events, right? So maybe Loki appears in Ant-Man Quantumania doing something, but it's like, if you want to know what he was doing that led to this, go check out the Loki TV show. And if you want to know what he's going to be doing after this, go check out the Loki TV show or something along those lines, right? But seeing characters kind of crossing over, zigzagging from the TV shows to the movies, I think this might be the first real time that actually happens. And if it is, I'm excited about that. I'm also a little bit nervous because I feel like that could be a little confusing for the average viewer, but I don't necessarily know if that's going to be the case. I mean, the only concern that I have here, if Loki and Ant-Man 3 really do cross over, is that it could be a little jarring and maybe a little confusing for the average viewer, but as long as they do it in a way that makes sense, right? You just watch the whole Loki show, you watch the whole movie Quantumania, and then as you're doing that, you're like, oh yeah, okay, cool. I remember that moment in Quantumania, so that's what Loki was doing, right? And that kind of light bulb goes off. I don't think they'll make it overly convoluted and overly complicated. The MCU is predicated on simplicity, but let me know what you guys think. But with that being said, we're gonna bring this episode to an end. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.